Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. You will hear a woman phoning a restaurant to book a room for a party. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Good morning, Shaw's Restaurant.
Hi, I'd like to book one of your function rooms for a party, please.
Okay, fine. How many people are you expecting for the party?
Well, I'm not quite sure yet, but about 60. There are about 60 people expected, so 60 has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning, Shaw's Restaurant.
Hi, I'd like to book one of your function rooms for a party, please.
Okay, fine. How many people are you expecting for the party?
Well, I'm not quite sure yet, but about 60.
Fine. So you will need a big room. And what day were you thinking of?
The party's for my daughter's birthday. It's her 21st. Her birthday's actually on the 17th of November, but that's a Friday, so we thought we'd have her party on the 18th as that's a Saturday. There'll be lots of her friends there as well as all the family.
And what time would you like the room for?
Oh, I'm not sure. 7:45? Not too late.
Okay.
And people will probably be leaving about 11.
Fine. We're open until 11:30.
Excellent. And what about the menu?
So, do you want a sit-down meal with waiter service?
Yes, not a buffet.
Right. Well, there are several options including different menus at various prices. So there's the standard menu, that's £25 per person.
Okay.
Or the celebration menu, which is 3 courses, it's very popular, that's £35.
Okay, I think I'd rather go with that.
And there's also our gold menu, that's a 5-course menu at £50.
No, that's definitely too expensive.
Okay.
Now, not all the guests eat meat. Will there be something for them?
Of course. We'll make sure there's a vegetarian option for each course.
Great.
And do you know if any of the guests have food allergies? Anything like shellfish, for example?
I'll need to check, but I do know that one of my daughter's friends is very allergic to strawberries. Even just being near them can be a problem.
Okay. I'll make a note to our chef to avoid those completely. Do you have any other requests for desserts?
Well, I'd like a choice if possible. And could we have cheese as well?
Of course, no problem. We can provide that.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Now, do you have any other requests I could help with? What about after dinner entertainment? You can book a band if you'd like live music.
Actually, I think a disco would be best if you can arrange that.
No problem.
And I heard you might be able to put on a fireworks display. Is that possible?
We aren't offering that service anymore, I'm afraid. It was just too expensive.
Oh, I see.
Now, the menu package you've chosen includes a few other nice things.
Oh, like what?
We'll decorate the room for you, which creates a nice party atmosphere. We can use different colors for the balloons: silver, gold.
She loves pink, but actually, I think she'd prefer flowers to balloons, so let's go for them instead, in the same color.
No problem. Now, you mentioned that the party's for your daughter. We make birthday cakes if you'd like one.
Okay, yes, we'll definitely want a cake.
And we can put a special message on top. What would you like?
Congratulations, and then her name. That's Susie.
Fine.
Now, one or two of the guests are coming by train, but they stop running quite early, so they'll need a taxi to take them to the Forest Hotel after the party. Is that something you can sort out?
Absolutely. Anything else?
I think that's all for now.
Okay. Well, just get in touch if you think of anything else. Now, if I can just take some contact details, I just need your name and phone number.
I'm Maria Nelson, and my number's 07749 132 760.
Excellent. We look forward to seeing you soon.
That is the end of Section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 2. You will hear a radio broadcast about a new museum which specializes in vacuum cleaners. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
A new museum has just opened dedicated to vacuum cleaners. Yes, that's right, vacuum cleaners, the machines powered by electricity that suck up the dust and dirt from the floor. The museum's opened in a town called Eastwood in central England. Until now, Eastwood used to be an industrial town where people used to be employed as coal miners. But then, a local resident called James Brown became frustrated with the nation's failure to recognize the importance of vacuum cleaners, and he decided to set up his own museum. James first fell in love with vacuum cleaners when he was only 4 years old. At the time, his mother was unwell, so he used to help her out by vacuuming the house, and it was to be the start of the lifelong love affair with this humble household appliance. However, it wasn't until James was 8 years old that he first acquired his own vacuum cleaner. After it had been thrown away on the streets, he took it home, cleaned it up, and plugged it in. Amazingly, it still worked. And that was the beginning of his collections. By the time he was in his teens, his collections had grown to 30. The collection continued to grow until it reached the final count of 126, which it stands at today. James is delighted to share his enthusiasm of vacuum cleaners with visitors. One of his favorite party tricks is to blindfold his eyes so he can't see and ask someone to switch on one of the machines. When I tested him out on 5 different machines, switching them on and pushing them across the floor, he had no problem telling me the manufacturer of each one, and he could even tell its age. Loading on now a common household appliance, it wasn't until 1950s that most people could afford to buy a vacuum cleaner, as before that they were very expensive. In today's money, you would have had to pay around a third of the price for an average car, which is around 3 months' wages for most people. Like most modern appliances, the invention of a production line halved the price almost immediately. But James is not the only vacuum cleaner aficionado out there, and a few years ago, he made a special trip to the USA to the factory of his favorite, the Kirby vacuum cleaner. There is also an American website called Vacuum Land that's dedicated to vacuum cleaner collectors. This year, they're even holding a convention in Texas with competition, awards, and lectures on the subject. So James might want to pop back to the United States to meet some vacuum lovers. So, if you've been inspired and want to visit James's Vacuum Cleaner Museum, what days could you go to visit? Well, they're open all year round from 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. from Tuesdays to Saturdays, except Thursdays when they're open until 7 p.m. and Mondays when the museum is closed.
Before you hear the rest of the broadcast, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 16 to 20.
The history of the vacuum cleaner is an interesting one. The first commercially available powered vacuum cleaner was invented in 1901 and was called the Puffing Billy. It was so large it had to be pulled by horses and parked outside the house where the cleaning was being done. It was initially driven by an oil engine, although it was later adapted to be powered by electricity, and it was used to clean the carpets and the palace of King Edward VII in London. One of the most famous electric vacuum cleaners is known as the Hoover. This was developed in the USA in 1908. It's often thought that it was created by a Mr. Hoover, but in fact, it was created by a James Spangler, who worked as a cleaner in a department store. Mr. Hoover was a businessman who bought the idea and then developed and marketed it in the USA and other countries. The Electrolytes Model 5 was developed in 1925. Up until that time, vacuum cleaners had been heavy devices which were not easily bought from. This was a lighter model which laid on the floor and can be pulled along on two strips of metal, and this was an idea that was copied by many other manufacturers. Then there's the Electrolytes 30 or Triple X, which was developed in 1937 in the USA and is perhaps the most visually elegant vacuum cleaner of all, with its sleek lines inspired by the Art Deco architecture popular in the 1930s. The most prized model in James's museum is the Kirby model, which is actually gold-plated. Kirby made Peace's trophy, but they also manufacture vacuum cleaners for everyday use, as sold only by salesmen who demonstrated them only in the customer's home. But even the everyday model might eventually become collector's items. Now, if you want to visit the museum,
That is the end of Section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You will hear a tutor called Dr. Harris and a student called Lisa discussing Lisa's postgraduate research project on the role of health visitors. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, Lisa. Good to see you again, especially since you've chosen to do your master's with us.
Well, I enjoyed my first degree in nursing, and I decided I want to become a health visitor. You know, someone who promotes health and well-being and is part of a team within a community, getting out and meeting people of all ages. So that's why I chose this research project.
Excellent. And your focus, the role of a health visitor in the community, is spot on. But at this stage, you need to keep an open mind so you can respond to initial findings once you get underway.
From what I read, the role seems to vary quite considerably.
Yes, some health visitors tend to focus on liaising with family doctors, others work independently with new patients. The work of health visitors in future is most likely to rely on the relationship between these roles, and I think that would be an interesting angle for you to pursue at some stage.
Yes, what I really want to impact is the problem of physical development checks, which start with babies when they are only a few days old.
Right.
Another area which I am thinking of investigating is the monitoring of nurseries, which is currently under review, and there is the issue of preschools, at what age they should take very young children. I thought I'd also include childminders, the individuals in the area of Haines that might not be qualified but look after young children.
That's an area I'd stay clear of as it's very complex.
Okay, will do. Anyway, I'd also like to make a short film about a few children.
A good idea, but it will depend on building up a relationship with one or two health visitors willing to introduce you to a family. An opportunity like that would allow you to look at how young children begin to form words, for example.
And peer relationships between children, as well as the ways in which they relate and play with each other, especially when they are around 2 to 3 years old, although early use of language is my main interest.
Okay, but there are other topic areas I'd like you to consider before we finalize the content and structure of your research. An equally important area is the child's home environment and the effect of a newborn baby.
Right.
You need to consider the impact of this on the parents, particularly if the family lives in poor economic circumstances. Of course, the additional expense could be a worry, especially if there are other children. Certainly, all those matters are very sensitive and not necessarily easy to detect. There's plenty of help available, but many people often feel too proud to ask for it.
This is the area where I will need to be familiar with family law, isn't it?
Very much so. By all means, be aware of the medical conditions and you also need to consider social practice. But you'll find that in most circumstances you will have to refer to the law to understand how far a health visitor can intervene.
Yes, I appreciate that. Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Now, your book list. I'm glad to see worldwide health care policies tops your list.
Well, I wasn't sure how relevant it would be, but it's a new edition, so the information is current.
Yes, some of it may not be relevant, but it's important to keep abreast of developments in other countries, which may inform our own government's legislation.
I understand. What about supporting vulnerable families? It's not as costly as some of the other books on my list.
It's an excellent buy considering the price, even though it does leave a few things out.
I've already ordered Health Visitors and Child Protection. I hope that was right.
Well, it's very expensive, but it's a sound investment, and there aren't many textbooks which cover as much detail as this. It will be a valuable reference even if the style is occasionally boring.
And what about the future of health visiting? I'm unsure how useful it will be.
Useful in a utilitarian sense? Probably not, but it's stimulating in the way the writer considers what health visiting could be like in a perfect world. I'd suggest dipping into it to discover the improvements which could be made if money were no object.
And resources for health visitors?
Strangely enough, it's not as helpful as the title suggested. It offers a huge variety of activities and strategies which are great when working with young children, but they're presented in a rather haphazard way, and the index isn't much use either. Be very careful when using it.
Okay. That is the end of Section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. You will hear a lecturer giving a talk to psychology students about people's sense of smell. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon. So far in this course on perception, we have focused on sight. Today, we're going to move on to consider a sense that has received rather less attention in the literature on human perception. That is, our sense of smell. It's often said that our ability to sense smells is much less developed than that of animals, such as the dog, or a fish, such as the shark, or, of course, the creature which is believed to have the most acute sense of smell of all, the bear. Yet it seems that this belief that the human sense of smell is weak might actually be a misconception. According to a number of recent studies, our noses are sensitive instruments that influence us in surprising ways. Subtle smells can change your mood. Smell can even influence what you go for when you have to make choices, perhaps about whether to buy something or not. Yet, the power that smell has over us is, by and large, not something that we are aware of. So the big mystery is why it is subconscious. One possible reason is that our noses aren't well equipped to detect the source of an odor, and so we dismiss it. Let's look at some practical examples of how smell can influence us. The power of smell will be no news to estate agents. They often suggest that people who want to sell a house arrange things so that there is a smell of newly baked bread on the property to encourage viewers to want to buy it. But there are more subtle and surprising effects too. For instance, Dutch researchers carried out a study into the impact of smell in a nightclub. They discovered, rather to their surprise, that when the aroma of oranges was pumped into the venue, the guests partied harder. They danced more, rated their night as more enjoyable, and even thought the music was better than when there was no added scent. Another study found that the hint of a smell wafting out of a hidden bucket of lemon-scented detergent was enough to persuade students to clean the communal kitchen after using it, even though the vast majority of them hadn't actually registered the smell. Other work has found that scent can influence our cognitive skills. A study this year gave participants a task to test their decision-making abilities. It found that subjecting people to a new smell, either good or bad, let people relying on their emotions to make a decision rather than relying on logic. As a result, these people performed significantly worse than normal when doing the task. Our sense of smell may even help us to pick up on how those around us are feeling. It has been shown that certain animals can smell each other's fear. Is it possible that humans can do the same thing? To test the idea, one team of scientists took sweat samples from people doing a skydive for the first time. They also took sweat samples from the same people after they had worked up their sweat in a gym, a situation where no fear is involved. They presented the different samples in turn to a series of subjects who did not know the reason for the experiment. As they did this, the scientists observed the subject's brain activity by means of a scanner, and they saw a much stronger reaction to the skydive sweat. The team of scientists next tested whether the smell of fear sweat, that is, the sweat of the skydivers, affected people's responses to various facial expressions. Normally, people pay more attention to angry faces because they pose a threat. However, after smelling the fear sweat, the participants gave the same amount of attention to neutral facial expressions. Despite the impact of smell, most people seem totally unaware of how they are being affected by scents. However, some psychologists have been trying to train people's noses. They persuaded 32 students to wear blindfolds and ear defenders and see whether they could sniff out a trail of chocolate. They found that after 3 days of practice, the students were all much more accurate in following the trail. Further evidence of our ability to train our noses comes from a chef who lost her sense of smell after an illness. Knowing that her job depended on her having a good nose, she trained herself gradually by sniffing spices for 10 minutes a day. Gradually, her ability to smell returned. Now, let's talk on about the...
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.